The year was 1943. While the headlines screamed of the European soft underbelly, a different, more savage war was being fought in the suffocating heat of the Pacific. This was a war not of mechanized divisions, but of inches and whispers, fought in jungle darkness and on coral beaches where the enemy bled brown blood into the sand. The men of the U.S. Marine Corps called the enemy the Jap, a name spat out with a mixture of fear and rage. And the greatest fear, the shadow on the edge of the perimeter, was the unseen sniper. In this savage landscape, Staff Sergeant Frank Deadeye Carter, a man whose quiet demeanor hid a coiled intensity, found himself on an anonymous atoll in the Gilberts. He was a scout, a marksman, and a ghost. He was also a target of ridicule. His unit had landed after the initial brutal wave, and the men, grizzled and weary, looked upon Carter's gear with open contempt. The object of their derision was his rifle. While most Marines carried the standard dependable M1 Garand, Carter carried a relic, the Springfield Model 1903, bolt action with a heavy, fixed scope mounted awkwardly above the receiver. "Look it, Deadeye," smirked Private Miller, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the steaming earth. "Still got your grandpappy's deer rifle? Thought we were fighting a war, not buying trinkets from the Sears catalog." The mail-order jibe stung because it held a kernel of truth. The U.S. military, scrambling to arm itself, had been slow to standardize a modern sniper program. The rifles Carter and his fellow marksmen carried were often surplus, cobbled together from older models, fitted with civilian or hastily produced scopes, and issued as an afterthought. They were bulky, slow to reload compared to the semi-automatic Garand, and considered by the average infantryman to be a liability in a close-quarters firefight. They looked less like instruments of military precision and more like custom sporting rifles, the kind you might literally mail-order pre-war. But Carter knew better. He ran his hand over the worn walnut stock of the Springfield. The Garand was a magnificent tool for suppressing fire and leading a charge. The Springfield, however, was a surgical instrument. It was a commitment. It required absolute certainty, for every shot meant cycling the bolt, losing the sight picture, and sacrificing precious seconds. Its virtue lay in its legendary accuracy and its potent .30-06 caliber round that could penetrate jungle foliage and light cover with reliable, bone-shattering force. The Marines, however, were still learning that this was a different kind of war. The Japanese strategy relied on blending into the thick cover, becoming invisible, and using their own highly trained snipers to demoralize the Americans by taking out officers, radio men, and medics, the command and control. The silent, sudden whack of a sniper round was more terrifying than 100 enemy charges. It eroded confidence and turned every shadow into a potential enemy. Carter's job was to hunt those shadows. He was the counter-assassin, the remedy for the creeping terror. He was about to prove that his mail-order rifle in the hands of a master was the only thing that could save their lives. The proving ground was a small, fiercely contested perimeter, and the clock was ticking down to a crucial 4-day push. The island was a crucible, a steaming, fetid stretch of sand and razor-sharp coral where the jungle pushed right up to the beach. Every day brought the same symphony of misery. The constant humidity that turned leather boots to mush and made clothes stick like wet paper, the sickly sweet smell of decay and unburied waste, and the pervasive, nagging dread caused by the unseen enemy. The Japanese snipers were masters of camouflage, and their doctrine was simple: die where you stand and take as many Americans with you as possible. They tied themselves into the crowns of coconut palms, buried themselves in shallow pits under tangled roots, or lashed themselves to the densest parts of the jungle canopy. Their movements were agonizingly slow, their positions meticulously chosen to offer overlapping fields of fire across the critical pathways and supply lines the Marines relied on. The effect was devastating. For 3 days prior to Carter's arrival at this specific perimeter, the Marine Company, Company D, had been paralyzed. Captain Wallace, a competent officer, had lost his executive officer and 2 squad leaders to single, clean shots delivered from impossible angles. The men refused to leave cover. Supplies lay untouched. The forward edge of the perimeter had stopped advancing, shrinking with every casualty. "They're up there, Deadeye," Captain Wallace told Carter, gesturing weakly toward the dense foliage that began 50 yards past the beach. The captain was a wreck, his eyes wide and bloodshot from sleepless nights. 3 of them, maybe 4. They got the whole kill zone mapped. One takes a shot, the next one covers him. The third one shifts to a new angle. We shell the whole damn jungle, and 2 hours later, they're back. Silent, precise. The Marines had tried everything. Machine gunners' sprays did nothing but waste ammo. Mortar fire tore up the ground but failed to dislodge the masters of concealment. The enemy was so effective at hiding that the Marines could only mark the general direction of the fire, never the exact source. The snipers were using captured or custom rifles, often firing tracers or marking rounds to adjust their fire, but their primary weapon was the mental warfare, the knowledge that death could descend from the sky in any instant with no warning. Carter knew the problem was optical, not tactical. The human eye struggles to find a perfect circle in a field of green and brown chaos. A faint muzzle flash, a single strand of wire, a disturbance in a bird's nest. These were the signs that passed unnoticed by the frantic, sweat-stung eyes of the riflemen. But Carter's job was to see what others missed. His Springfield, slow and derided as it was the answer to their paralysis. He began his preparations with the obsessive meticulousness of a priest preparing a sacrament. He gathered local moss, mud, and strips of canvas, meticulously breaking up the sharp outline of his body. He wrapped the scope of his rifle in gauze to prevent any reflective glare from the Pacific sun. He moved not with military urgency, but with the glacial, almost biological speed of a praying mantis. He used the enemy's silence against them, listening for the change in the buzz of insects, the slight drop of a twig, the sound of a bolt cycling that was muffled by the wind. He was hunting men who believed they were invisible, but Carter was about to introduce them to a predator whose patience and precision were absolute. Carter began his counter-sniper operation not at dawn, but in the oppressive stillness of the afternoon. He selected an observation point behind a shattered palm trunk that offered a low, wide field of view toward the jungle edge. The ground was littered with spent shells and the discarded debris of previous unsuccessful attempts to advance. The tension in the air was palpable. Every Marine in Company D was watching him, holding their breath, waiting for the familiar, dreaded sound of a bullet finding its mark. For 3 hours, Carter did nothing. He was a statue of mud and canvas. He used his 10-power scope not to find a man, but to find an anomaly. He scanned the tree line inch by inch, looking for the telltale signs of a man-made position, a faint rope, a pattern of shadows that defied the natural fall of the light, the almost imperceptible displacement of leaves. His heart rate was slow, his breathing shallow, a deliberate act of meditation amidst the war zone. Then a flicker, a glint of brass. It was not a man. It was a single, tiny, circular reflection, high up in the dense crown of a massive banyan tree, positioned perfectly to overlook the Marine supply stack. It was the rim of a scope, or perhaps the eyepiece of an observer's binoculars. The sniper was exceptionally well hidden, 40 feet up, camouflaged with vines and palm fronds. The position was brilliant. It put him above the effective range of most direct-fire weapons and made him impossible to spot from the ground. Carter's training took over. He settled the heavy rifle onto a small custom-made sandbag. The Springfield 1903 had no semi-automatic action to distract him. The simplicity forced him into a deep, singular focus. He adjusted the elevation knob on his scope, a small, slow turn to account for the vertical distance. He held his breath for the final, agonizing seconds. The crosshairs settled on the reflection, knowing the bullet had to pass through a foot of leaves and wood before hitting the target. He didn't aim for the reflection. He aimed for the center mass directly behind it, accounting for the bullet drop over the estimated 200-yard distance. The shot cracked, loud and distinct in the jungle stillness. It was a singular sound, unlike the rattle of the Garand or the thump of a mortar. The report was instantly followed by the sound of a heavy weight hitting the ground. A Japanese sniper, tied into the banyan tree, came crashing down through the leaves, his rifle clattering onto the coral. The body was obscured by the canopy, but the Marines saw the sudden, massive disturbance. A cheer, tentative at first, went up among the nearest Marines, but Carter was already cycling the bolt, reloading the chamber and searching for the reaction. The Japanese, arrogant in their invisibility, rarely believed a single Marine could pinpoint their position. The second sniper, covering the first, always exposed himself slightly to confirm the fate of their comrade. There it was, a slight shift in the foliage to the left, about 100 yards away, revealing a dark, helmeted shape peering through a bush. The man had moved to get a better look at the fallen tree. Carter was faster. Crack! The second shot was a fraction of a second quicker than the first. The dark shape slumped. A second enemy sniper neutralized. The Marines in the perimeter were now fully alert, staring in amazement at the silent master of the long shot. In 2 minutes, Frank Carter had done what concentrated fire and mortars could not do in 3 days. He had killed 2. The mockery of the mail-order rifle died instantly on the lips of every Marine watching. The perimeter had just been given its first taste of peace. The immediate silence was misleading. The 2 sudden deaths sent a clear message to the remaining Japanese snipers. There was a counter-sniper, an American ghost, now operating within the perimeter. The rules of the silent game had changed. Carter was no longer just a hunter. He was the primary target. The rest of that day was a slow, agonizing duel. Carter moved his position 3 times, never staying in one spot for more than 30 minutes, even if he hadn't fired. He understood the Japanese sniper mentality. They were trained to be hyper-patient, but they were also trained to be fanatically protective of their own. They would commit their resources to eliminating the threat he posed. His third kill came late in the day. He spotted a barely visible reflection off the brass of a casing ejection port, hidden in a low root tangle. The enemy sniper was firing from a prone position, using a small earth mound as cover, clearly aiming to suppress any movement near the newly exposed banyan tree position. This required an extremely low, flat trajectory. Carter had to account for the wind, the heavy foliage, and the bullet's inevitable tendency to rise slightly before dropping. He had perfected the Kentucky windage of the Springfield, the subtle adjustments learned through thousands of practice shots. This time, the counterfire was instant. As soon as Carter's rifle cracked, 2 Japanese riflemen, regular infantry, not snipers, alerted by the sound, began hosing the general area of his previous position with automatic fire. But Carter was already moving, his third kill confirmed by the lack of returning fire from the root position. The Marines were emboldened. They started moving supplies, taking advantage of the sudden, brief lull in accurate fire. The next day, the second day of the operation, the enemy intensified their efforts. They had clearly brought forward their most skilled marksmen. The morning began with a horrific show of precision. A Japanese sniper, using a position invisible to Carter, managed to put 3 rapid shots into the sandbag of a Marine machine gun position closest to the jungle. The rounds missed the gunner, but demonstrated the enemy's ability to track and fire with terrifying speed. Carter knew he had to find the source immediately. He climbed into a shattered water tower, a risky, exposed position that offered a vertical view over the entire perimeter. Using his powerful scope, he began his methodical scan. This time, he found the sniper not through reflection or movement, but through the color of the soil. High on a bank overlooking the supply route, a patch of freshly turned earth stood out. An impossibly small, subtle mound where the sniper had carefully pushed the jungle dirt aside to create a clean field of fire. It took Carter 10 agonizing minutes to stabilize his rifle atop the shaky water tower. The wind whipped past him. He ignored the frantic calls of the Marines below telling him to get down. His fourth shot of the operation struck the center of the disturbed earth. There was no visible movement, no crash, just the sudden, complete silence from the sniper's nest. When Marines checked the position later, they found the enemy marksman killed instantly, his face pressed into his tiny, self-made pit. This was the nature of the Pacific Sniper War, a constant, invisible exchange of death, where the slightest error in camouflage or patience meant execution. Carter was now well into his fourth kill, and the 4-day timeline to clear the perimeter was becoming a reality, fueled entirely by the slow, deliberate rhythm of his mail-order rifle. By the third day, the engagement had become a highly personalized war between the remnants of the Japanese Sniper Corps and Staff Sergeant Carter. The Japanese command knew that if the Americans cleared this perimeter, it would allow their heavy weapons to advance and doom the entire forward defense. The enemy deployed what Marines later termed their suicide snipers, marksmen tasked solely with finding Carter even at the cost of their own lives. The tension was suffocating. Every movement in the jungle was now scrutinized. Every rifle crack was immediately answered by a new one. Carter, fully aware of his exposed position, rarely slept, preferring to take brief, controlled catnaps during the day's peak heat. He subsisted on canned rations and the raw adrenaline of the hunt. His uniform, now thoroughly stained with jungle mud, sweat, and oil, had become his second skin. Kills 5, 6, and 7 came in quick succession, but each one was more dangerous than the last. Kill 5 was a classic rope and tree position, spotted only when Carter saw a slight unnatural depression in the bark where a heavy knot was digging in. Kill 6 was a textbook example of waiting for the enemy to adjust his scope, the brief momentary flash of sun on glass. Kill 7 was a dangerous shot, a man hidden behind a stack of captured American supplies, requiring Carter to shoot a dangerous deflection off a piece of metal. The most dramatic moment of this day was the duel for Kill 10. The sniper, clearly a high-ranking marksman, had hidden himself in a position that allowed him to fire down a narrow-covered trench the Marines were using for communication. The enemy marksman knew the Americans would be moving in this trench, and his fire was utterly accurate, pinning down an entire squad of reinforcements. Carter positioned himself on the flank, having to shoot diagonally across an exposed stretch of beach, making him visible for a long shot. The distance was over 400 yards, an extremely long, exposed shot for an unmodernized scope on a bolt-action rifle, requiring him to calculate not just elevation, but the subtle effect of the prevailing sea breeze. He watched the sniper's firing position through his scope, a tiny, almost indistinguishable spot where two large rocks met. He saw the flash, heard the distant crack, and simultaneously saw the dust kick up in the Marine's trench. The sniper was good. Carter settled the crosshairs, waiting for the briefest moment of exposure. The sniper fired again. Carter held his breath. This was the critical difference between the M1 Garand and the Springfield. The Garand was an instrument of volume. The Springfield demanded perfection in a single round. The round count on Carter's score sheet was a testament to his restraint. He fired his 10th round. The Marines in the trench reported silence. The high-ranking sniper was found dead, his rifle still smoking, with the single .30-06 round having passed through clean through the impossibly small gap between the two rocks, ending his fight instantly. The psychological effect on the Japanese was shattering. The Marines, meanwhile, had begun to call his Springfield the voice of God. The night of the third day was the first time in weeks the Marine Company perimeter experienced true, unmolested quiet. The demoralization among the enemy forces was palpable. The Japanese had realized they were not just facing an American marksman, they were facing a legend, a ghost who could see through their best efforts at concealment. The fourth day was meant to be the final push, the advance that would clear the perimeter and allow the heavy engineer equipment to come ashore. But the Japanese had one final, desperate card to play. Their most highly trained, near-mythical sniper, known only by the nickname the Shadow among the enemy ranks. This man was believed to have trained in Manchuria and was a master of the double concealment technique. Carter felt the change in the air. The silence was too complete, too perfect. He established his final firing position on the roof of a partially bombed-out shack, giving him maximum elevation and a clear line of sight. He scanned for 2 hours, his eyes aching behind the scope, unable to find the slightest anomaly. The shadow was truly invisible. Carter, however, began hunting not for the sniper, but for his arc of fire. He had the Marines carefully place bright marker tape over the 3 most vulnerable positions, the ammo dump, the radio antenna, and Captain Wallace's command post. He waited. Finally, a shot rang out, not at a man, but specifically hitting the radio antenna, shearing it off clean. The enemy sniper was confirming his range and showing his precision. The shot was followed by a plume of smoke from an impossible location, a small, dense thicket of mangrove roots that appeared to offer no firing lane whatsoever. Carter's mind raced. To fire from that position, the sniper must have cleared a tunnel through the roots. The smoke was a momentary tell. He aimed his 11th round not at the center of the smoke, but at the exit point of the imagined tunnel, a patch of dirt 1 inch wide, 50 yards away from the smoke, where the barrel would have had to clear the roots. He fired. The shot was immediate, lethal, and definitive. A single cry, choked off instantly, followed by the clatter of a rifle hitting rock, marked his 11th kill in just 4 days. The Marines went in immediately, finding the highly trained Japanese sniper still tied into his position, killed by a single shot to the head from an angle that should have been impossible. The shadow was silenced. The perimeter was cleared. The Marines surged forward. The legend of Frank Carter and his mail-order Springfield had permanently broken the back of the Japanese counter-sniper operation on the island. The men who mocked his rifle now treated it and him with a deep, reverent awe. The battle was won, but the story of the rifle was just beginning. Frank Carter's extraordinary feat of killing 11 top-tier enemy snipers in 4 days, a record of lethal efficiency, did far more than just save a Marine company. It triggered a fundamental shift in U.S. military doctrine regarding sniping. Prior to Carter's demonstration, the prevailing view was that the semi-automatic M1 Garand was the future of all American infantry weaponry, relegating the bolt-action rifle to a dated relic. Snipers were often seen as isolated specialists, not central components of tactical warfare. But Carter proved that in the close, jungle-heavy combat of the Pacific, where the enemy relied on surgical stealth, only the specialized high-accuracy bolt action could win the duel. The men in the field demanded answers. They wanted to know why their snipers were forced to use a mix of aging, customized equipment. The official military investigation into the success of the Gilbert campaign led directly to the scrutiny of the rifles used. They discovered that the Springfield 1903s, in the hands of men like Carter, were maintaining incredible precision due to the rifle's inherently simple, rigid action and the robust power of the 30-06 round. The very parts that have been mocked, the heavy barrel, the slow bolt action, the deliberate non-issue scopes, were what made the rifle so deadly. The bolt-action cycle forced the sniper to confirm his target and placement, eliminating the hasty spray-and-pray mentality that plagued the Garand users in close combat. The rigid action ensured that every round was chambered and fired with mechanical consistency, given the sniper's pinpoint accuracy that the semi-automatic gas-operated systems could not yet match. The result of the success of snipers like Carter was the rapid standardization of the sniper rifle. The War Department, finally convinced, accelerated the production and deployment of purpose-built sniper variants, specifically the Springfield 1903A4 and later the M70 Winchester, marking a renewed commitment to the high-precision bolt-action rifle as the only true weapon for a sniper. The mail-order rifle was no longer an embarrassment. It was the foundation of the modern American sniper program. Carter, like many snipers, was not comfortable with the hero worship. He was given a commendation, but he maintained the quiet anonymity that defined his profession. He saw his work not as heroism, but as a necessary calculation, a job where he had to be better, faster, and more precise than the man on the other side of the scope. He believed that every Marine he killed on the other side was simply a confirmation of his superior training and equipment. The irony that the equipment had been mocked was never lost on him. Staff Sergeant Frank Carter survived the war, carrying the silent weight of his 11 confirmed kills in 4 days. Like many snipers, he returned to a civilian life that felt alien after the intensity of the war. He carried no grand tales of charges or bombardments, only the knowledge that his life had been saved, and he had saved countless others, one single, slow, deliberate shot at a time. The true battlefield for a sniper was not the jungle, but the distance between the last heartbeat and the first breath held before the trigger pull. Carter's story, while officially categorized by military historians, often fades into the broader narrative of the Pacific battles. He wasn't a celebrity like the European generals or the machine-gunning heroes. He was a whisper, a shadow. But his legacy is stamped firmly into the tactical DNA of the U.S. Marine Corps. His achievement underscored a critical, enduring truth of warfare. Technology and standardization are essential, but the ultimate effectiveness of any weapon relies on the skill, dedication, and calculated patience of the individual soldier. The Springfield, a rifle already considered obsolete, became in his hands the most feared weapon on the island, not because of its speed, but because of its demand for precision. Today, if you look at the training regimen of any modern Marine Corps scout sniper, you see the enduring shadow of Frank Carter. They are taught meticulous camouflage, the art of observation, and the importance of the single, ethical, non-wasteful shot. They use high-powered bolt-action rifles that are the direct descendants of the mocked Springfield 1903, chosen for the same immutable reasons: mechanical consistency and raw, long-range accuracy. The story of the mail-order rifle is the story of American ingenuity born of necessity and the quiet professionalism that triumphs over chaos. Carter didn't need the latest gear. He needed a rifle he understood completely, a rifle that wouldn't fail him at the moment of truth. He took a scrap of obsolete technology, mastered it, and turned it into the single most potent tool of psychological and physical warfare in his sector. He didn't fight for glory. He fought for the men pinned down in the sand who were dying under the oppressive shadow of the unseen enemy. He simply answered the shadow with a single, perfectly calculated, and unanswerable flash of light and thunder. And in doing so, Frank Carter and his humble, mail-order rifle earned a place in the pantheon of Pacific legends, proving that sometimes the slowest gun in the fight is the one that delivers the fastest, most effective form of justice.